In an 1.8 square meter apartment in Osaka, a 2-year-old man was found dead 3 weeks later. No friend called, no neighbor noticed the silence. Expired food was still on the table. His name didn't make the headlines because his story wasn't the exception. In Japan, this is called Kodokushi, dying alone and in silence. Not by choice, but because the absence of meaning conquered even before physical death. There is no Western equivalent for this. It is not suicide from despair. It is oblivion from dissolution. It is the end of someone who never screamed, who was erased from the inside out. While existentialist philosophies in the West still try to name the void, give shape to nothingness, debate the absurd, and create tools to overcome it, Japan has learned to live silently with it, to accept it as part of the scenery, as the background noise of a life without a center. And this is what makes the Japanese void crueler than any Western version. It doesn't confront, it dissolves. Nietzsche wrote, "If you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you." But the Japanese void doesn't return the gaze. It smiles, serves tea, and waits. The beauty with which Japan sculpts nothingness makes it even more fatal. Here, suffering doesn't scream, it bends. While the West tries to defeat the void with theories, therapies, or rebellion, Japan aestheticizes it, transforming the collapse itself into a form. Into harmony, into ceremony, as if psychic death could be educated, elegant, almost sacred, but it is not, and the numbers don't lie. More than 20,000 people commit suicide annually in Japan, and we are not talking about spikes, wars, or economic collapses. We are talking about routines, stable wages, high life expectancy. It is a country that won on the outside and rotted on the inside. A people trained to maintain composure, even when the soul is no longer present. This is not a cultural critique. It is an existential warning. There is a type of void that doesn't explode. It implodes. And if you don't recognize the signs, it has already begun to devour you. In this video, we will understand why the Japanese void is not only deeper, it is more treacherous, more polite, more acceptable, and therefore infinitely more dangerous. A man climbs onto the roof of a military barracks in Tokyo. He wears a ceremonial uniform he designed himself. In his fist, he holds a manifesto. Facing him, young soldiers watch in silence. He speaks for 7 minutes, shouting for honor, for meaning, for a Japan that no longer exists. And then, Yukio Mishima, the most famous Japanese writer of the post-war era, kneels on the floor, opens his own abdomen with a blade, and dies in a 19th century samurai ritual in the middle of 1970. It wasn't an outburst. It was a meticulously rehearsed performance. Mishima spent years preparing this ending. It was his final work, a staged protest against a country that, according to him, had traded its soul for economic stability. Mishima believed that Japan had lost its spirit by winning the war through surrender, that modernity had transformed it into an empty shell, rich, functional, but spiritually dead. His death was grotesque, but the question he left is precise as a blade. What remains when a people moves away from everything that gave meaning to their pain? In ancient Greece, Achilles knew he would die young if he chose glory, but he chose. His death, although tragic, had direction. Mishima saw his country walking toward the opposite end. A long existence, without glory, without transcendence, without anything to justify the sacrifice. Jean Baudrillard wrote that Japan survived Hiroshima, but it did not survive the peace. Mishima felt it in his flesh and staged his own end as a way of not accepting the disappearance of meaning. It was a violent and futile refusal. Today, the Japan that Mishima tried to save with his death is more present than ever, emptied of meaning, but covered in aesthetics. Silent, functional, productive, and deeply exhausted. Young people no longer climb onto rooftops or give speeches. They simply disappear into their rooms, close the curtains, and cease to exist. Hikikomori, more than a million. No war, no disaster, no screams. Just managed void. Mishima's death is the exact opposite of this. It is noise, excess, gesture. But both are born from the same womb, the inability to inhabit a world where nothing is worthy of being lived anymore. Albert Camus said that the only truly serious philosophical problem is suicide. Mishima responded with his body. The Hikikomori with disappearance. But the question remains, and now perhaps it is more urgent, because the Japanese void doesn't appear as tragedy, it arrives as routine. It hides behind polite silence, external harmony, the serene face, and that is precisely why it wins. What happens when beauty becomes a disguise for despair? Wabi-Sabi, mono no aware, ma. Japanese aesthetic concepts celebrated in the West as expressions of ancient wisdom. They all revolve around the same idea, accepting impermanence, embracing incompleteness, finding beauty in what is about to break. On the surface, they are poetic ideas, but there is a fatal problem. None of them teach how to survive the pain, only how to observe it with elegance. Wabi-Sabi doesn't say resist, it says accept. Mono no aware doesn't say fight against time, it says admire its passing. They are invitations to contemplation, but they offer no path for those being crushed by existence. This is the subtle cruelty of the Japanese void. It is disguised as wisdom. It is the same logic as a terminal patient receiving a floral arrangement instead of morphine. The aesthetics of consolation substitute the urgency of salvation. Unlike European nihilism, which looks the abyss in the face with a scream or denial, the Japanese void infiltrates as polite silence. Instead of confrontation, it offers surrender. Instead of meaning, it offers form. This is where the Western philosophical tradition, despite its failures, shows its strength. The stoicism of Seneca, the absurd of Camus, the existentialism of Sartre, all start from real pain and do not hide it. Seneca writes, "The man who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary." Camus states, "The true serious man is the one who lives without appeal." These thoughts do not solve the void, but they face it. They name the enemy. They claim the right to feel pain and seek meaning, even when it does not exist. Wabi-Sabi, on the other hand, does not confront suffering. It stylizes it, and this is what makes it dangerous. When aesthetics substitute ethics, the individual stops looking for reasons to live and starts trying to die with composure. And dying well, even while alive, becomes an ideal more valued than living intensely. The South Korean philosopher Byung-Chul observes this phenomenon precisely. Depression is the disease of a society suffering from an excess of positivity. In Japan, this excess is not motivational, it is aesthetic. It is the excess of form over content, of beauty over salvation, and this is precisely what leads so many to collapse. What begins as an acceptance of impermanence ends as disguised surrender. Death ceases to be an enemy and becomes a landscape. And there is nothing crueler than a culture that teaches you to die beautifully, but not to live with self-created meaning. We want to belong, but we lose ourselves by fitting in. We want to be accepted, but acceptance requires us to disappear. The contradiction is simple, brutal, and daily. The more we try to be part of it, the less we know who we are. In Japan, this dilemma is not only personal, it is structural. It is called wa, the ideal of social harmony. An ancient value that runs through companies, families, friendships, marriages. The idea that the collective is worth more than the individual, that friction must be avoided at all costs, and that discord is a form of selfishness. In practice, this means smiling even when you are on the verge of collapse, being polite while dying inside, disappearing in the name of order. It is the burden of a society that demands absolute conformity without ever saying out loud, that you must annihilate yourself. It is a collective theater where everyone acts, and no one knows who they are outside the role. On the surface, everything seems in balance, but the balance is maintained with the sacrifice of the soul. The philosophy of Foucault helps to understand this mechanism. He observed that modern forms of control no longer operate through visible repression, but through invisible self-surveillance. Power doesn't command, it suggests. It doesn't forbid, it waits. And the subject, so as not to disappoint, conforms to the mold even before being corrected. In Japan, this surveillance is cultural, not political, but the effect is the same. An army of people trained not to ask questions, not to inconvenience, not to exist outside their function. The Japanese psychologist Takeo Doi called this amai, the unconscious dependence on social approval, a dependence so internalized that the person prefers to disappear rather than break with the expectations of others. This explains why Japan has one of the lowest violent crime rates in the world and one of the highest suicide rates. Suffering doesn't explode, it implodes. Conflict doesn't appear, it rots. In the West, pain often turns into fury, art, protest. In Japan, it turns into absence. A teenager in Tokyo can spend months without leaving their room, supported by their parents, ashamed to exist. An adult can work 14 hours a day, smile all the time, and drop dead at the train station from karoshi, literally, death from overwork. Both are symptoms of the same poison, the demand for total harmony. Byung-Chul said that the pressure to perform today replaces the repression of the past. But in Japan, repression still exists, only in silence, covered in courtesy. And the result is this: the more perfect the harmony, the more suffocating it becomes. The collective, when it doesn't allow chaos, kills the individual. This is not a cultural issue, it is human. It is the old tension between freedom and belonging, between authenticity and acceptance, between being and pleasing. And when a culture always chooses to please, the truth disappears. Along with it, people disappear. The void doesn't arrive as a scream, it arrives as routine. And precisely because of this, no one reacts. In the West, we created a response to this slow-motion collapse: Stoicism. The idea that, since life hurts, we must train the mind to endure pain with dignity. Epictetus said, "It is not things that trouble us, but our opinions about things. It's beautiful, it works, up to a point." But the Japanese void does not hurt acutely. It's not a fire you have to put out. It is a slow leak, rotting the structure from within. How to apply Stoicism to nothingness. How to rationalize a life that has no great catastrophes, only the exhaustive repetition of small renunciations. A young Japanese person wakes up, goes to work, returns to a tiny apartment, heats up pre-packaged curry in the microwave, turns on the TV, then the phone, then nothing. They stay there, swiping through videos, eating alone, thinking little, then sleeping, and it all starts again. There is no war, no misery, no scandal. There is only death in life. And the most terrifying thing, it works. This is the abyss. A daily life where everything is technically acceptable, but emotionally unbearable. The problem is not suffering. It is the absence of meaning in the suffering. Stoicism teaches endurance. But endure what, when all you are doing is surviving in a world that has already given up on depth? Anguish stops being the exception and becomes the background. The soul stops screaming and starts whispering until it disappears. Kierkegaard called this quiet despair. The greatest despair is not to be desperate about that which deserves despair. And this is what we see. Too many people accepting routines that kill slowly. Days that look normal on the outside and are devastating on the inside. In Japan, this became a lifestyle. And no amount of stoicism is enough when the problem is not the pain, it is the void between the pains. The Japanese void is not a failure. It is a success without a soul. Mishima tried to prevent this future with blood. He failed. Wabi-Sabi tried to soften the abyss with beauty. It failed. Social harmony tried to eliminate conflict and killed the individual. Stoicism tried to teach resistance, but it did not teach how to want to live. Everything we have seen so far points to the same wound. When a society transforms suffering into routine, it also normalizes the collapse. Japan built a world where everything works, except the human heart. Where suicide can be silent, aesthetic, invisible, but constant. Where beauty covers surrender. Where pain is not faced, it is only disguised. And this is what makes the Japanese void crueler than any Western philosophy. In the West, suffering is named. In Japan, it is accepted. In the West, pain generates conflict. In Japan, it generates silence. In the West, despair still asks for help. In Japan, it asks for permission and withdraws. This is the final lesson. Not all acceptance is wisdom. Not all silence is peace. Pretending that the soul can endure everything because the body still works is the best dressed lie of modernity. Albert Camus closes the myth of Sisyphus with the idea that we must imagine Sisyphus happy. But before imagining happiness, we need to at least recognize that we are pushing a rock every day to nowhere. Japan accepted the burden and forgot the meaning. That is the cruelty. That is the truth. And that is the lesson that, if ignored, is already killing you, even if no one realizes it. In a world where everything screams for distraction, stopping to look at the void head-on is an act of courage. If you have reached this point, it was not by chance. Perhaps you feel, like so many of us, that there is something wrong with the perfect surface of things, that the pain around us is not individual, but structural, that the silence surrounding us hides unanswered questions, and that facing this is not pessimism, it is lucidity. That's why I want to extend an invitation, but not for everyone. Only for those who have the stomach, for those who have already lost their illusions but still want to find a truth to sustain the soul. Subscribe to the channel and comment on what you hope for in upcoming videos, or how you feel. Maybe I can bring you a video with exactly what you need to hear or analyze. You are not only supporting this work, you are keeping a trench of deep thought alive in a world that prefers anesthesia. But if all you can do today is watch, comment, or share, that is more than enough. This channel only exists because there are people like you who refuse to accept the surface as truth. Here, we are a small but lucid community. We resist the rush, the emotional lie, and philosophical cowardice. And if this touches you, then you are already part of it. Thank you for being here, truly.